my name is Mathilde Brix Pedersen. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining this webinar today. So we're very happy and excited about this opportunity to bring together industry actors and the regulator, and to hear all our expert panelists here today on the challenges and opportunities in the captive solar PV market in Uganda. I'm from the UNEP DTU partnership, as mentioned. I'm here today with my colleague Lakshmi Bamidipati, and the UNEP DTU partnership is a UN Environment Program and Technical University of Denmark collaborating. It's Denmark-based, and we're providing research-based advisory services to support developing countries on energy, climate, and sustainable development. We are working in 70 countries across the globe, supporting climate negotiations through technology needs assessment work, for example. And the work today here is Danida funded, and we work with our partners Findings XY and Julius Magala on this project. It has a dual objective. The Tamarin project stands for Technology Markets and Investments for Low Carbon and Climate Resilient Development. And it's aiming to, or the objective is to strengthen markets for climate technologies, but also to support domestic industries in gaining a larger share of these markets. And we work through analysis of market-led interventions. We support partnerships for this transfer and diffusion and uptake of technologies, and we support strengthening of domestic markets. You can explore our work further at our website, and I believe Lakshmi shared a link in the chat. Last year, we worked in Kenya in the same project. Our focus is Kenya and Uganda, and last year we did a similar captive study of the captive power industry in Kenya, and we also did a big study, in-depth study of 14 Kenyan-owned solar PV companies in Kenya, and you can explore these works on our website. We also did some work in the small-scale irrigation sector in Kenya as part of this project. So this is just to share a little bit what we've done already, and now I'm very much looking forward to the discussions today. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Mathilde, for that introduction. At this juncture, I would like to introduce our panel for later today. I'm going to request my colleagues at Finding XY to, if they can briefly share the profiles that had been prepared as I ask the various panel discussants to briefly introduce themselves. I'd like to very humbled and honored to invite Engineer Ziria Tibalwa Waako, who's the CEO of Electricity Regulatory Authority. Kindly introduce yourself briefly, and welcome to this webinar.
Thank you, moderator. First is to appreciate and to thank the organizers of this webinar, as well as those who have put together the resources to enable us to get together on this very critical and key issue. We look at it from the sector as one of the enablers for us to achieve 100% of the population's access to clean energy. I'm Engineer Ziria Tibalwa Waako. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Electricity Regulatory Authority. Today I join you from my office, Plot 15 Shimon Road, head office. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Madam. Next, I'm going to invite Mr. George William Kiyingi, who's representing Postbank. You're welcome, and kindly introduce yourself.
Thank you, Joel. My name is George William Kiyingi. I work with Postbank Uganda Limited. I thank the team here for organizing this. I represent the managing director. He has not been able to join us. He's engaged somewhere else, but I will ably represent him. We thank you so much for putting this together, especially Joel and Eddie, and ensuring that we are part of this. At Postbank, financing green energy financing is one of our strategic objectives, and where we are heading to, we believe with partnerships with X and Y and all these other members on board, we shall be good to go. Thank you. Over to you, Joel.
Thank you, George William. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Muhammed Lubowa from All In Trade.
Thank you very much, Joel. I'm really pleased to be part of this webinar this morning. And to our listeners out there, my name is Lubowa Muhammed, and I'm the Managing Director and Founder of All In Trade Limited. At All In Trade Limited, we are an active energy solutions provider based here in Kampala, Uganda. And we are a company that has been doing this for the last 13 years, installing solar systems all over the country. I'm really happy to be here, and I look forward to a wonderful discussion this morning. Back to you, Joel.
Okay, thank you very much, Muhammad. Next, we're going to have a representative from NUCAFE. NUCAFE is a national union of coffee agribusinesses and farm enterprises. I think it's Mr. David Mwonge who's joined us today.
Thank you very much. Of NUCAFE, in charge of finance, administration, and compliance. Thank you for having me here. I'll be representing Mr. Joseph Mkandu. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Mr. Magala, Julius Magala, kindly introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Joel, and thank you to all that have been able to join this webinar. My name is Julius Magala. I've been really privileged to work with the team at Finding XY in this research, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some of the findings from the research. Thank you, and over to you, Joel.
Thanks, Julius. And I'm honored to be a moderator today. I supported Julius and the Finding XY team on this research activity. Thank you all for joining, and I thank all the panel speakers for having taken time to introduce themselves and share their profiles. I'm going to ask Merab just kindly show a brief snapshot of what the agenda is going to look like for today, and then we can head into the presentation. Thank you. So we've started off with the introductions of who the panel speakers are and who the team behind the Finding XY and the DTU teams. So the next thing, we're going to have a 30-minute presentation from Mr. Julius Magala. We've already had the introduction from the DTU team that was done by Mathilde and Eddie. And then after that, we'll have another 20-minute panel discussion. Speakers who have introduced themselves, the advantage of introducing early so that we don't lose time as we proceed. Then after the panel discussion, Q&A, so my colleagues may have a short poll, which will be, and as we'll have we'll have feedback, which we'll handle that, and then will be handled the DTU. So that's what hour and a half is going to look like. Thank you, Merab. And right now we are going to go directly to the presentation by Julius Magala on what the study was about. Julius, over to you.
Hello,
Yes.
Good morning once again. I do hope you can hear me loud and clear. So thank you again, Joel, and thank you for everyone that has managed to join into this webinar. So I'll be presenting the findings of the research that we did on the uptake of commercial and industrial solar in Uganda. And in my slides, I will start by just giving you a brief introduction as part of context on the electricity access situation in Uganda, and also just get out of the way some definitions and discussions around what captive power is. And we'll talk about the methodology that we've used for the research. And later on, I'll dive into the key findings for the research that has been carried out. And finally, be able to present what the key constraints and some conclusions from the research, and then we'll go into the panel discussion. So to start off, it's just to show what the current electricity profile of Uganda is. Uganda predominantly depends on hydro for its electricity generation, and thermal gas in terms of cogeneration and solar and other off-grid generation sources. Hydro is by far the largest contributor at about 8%, and then followed by thermal and also gas at around 8%, and then solar. From this generation capacity, the electricity connectivity rate is at about 28% as of 2019. And in terms of access to electricity in the rural areas, you see that 8% of the population is connected to the grid, 28% are using solar, and mini grids contributing about 1%, to that. In terms of our energy consumption, so we're currently having sales of about 4,171.4 gigawatt hours of consumption, which is serving about 1.62 million customers, of which the largest consumers of those are actually industries consuming about 67%, followed by domestic consumers, and then finally commercial consumers. In terms of just again for context, introducing what captive solar is, captive power generally, it does have a lot of names. Sometimes it's called embedded generation or distributed generation. In some literature, you find the term used auto producer, but generally from the Get Invest report and the UNEP DTU research, captive power is referred to as self-generation, especially for high energy consuming customers. And these are predominantly in the commercial and industrial or institutional sector. And it's not so much for the domestic or small businesses. So it really targets high energy consuming customers. Now, the sizes of captive solar or captive power plants do differ, but generally, I think the sizes ranges between 10 kilowatts to 20 megawatts. In Uganda, the captive solar plants that we've seen are actually ranging from about 10 kilowatts to about a megawatt, but we are also aware that for biogas generation, that goes up to 20 megawatt. Now you may ask, why are we talking about captive power? Why is it so important? And the first reason is really the opportunity for electricity cost savings, and these electricity cost savings are resulting from solar being cheap in this case and being able to offer a lower price compared to the grid. Now, from the developers that we've talked to, they report that customers are about to save between 20 or it costs them less by 20 to 30% compared to the grid. And one of the customers that we've spoken to says that they've been able to save at least 60% on the electricity bill per month. which is about 282 US dollars or 1 million Ugandan shillings. The second reason really for why captive power is important is that it does have an opportunity to really improve power reliability and quality. Now, the reliability of power has improved, over time area, but we still do have blackouts, often in Kampala, but also outside in other regions. And so there is an opportunity to really, improve the reliability of power using, again, captive power. And finally, for businesses that have a green agenda, there's also an opportunity to really reduce the carbon footprint, which results from especially use of diesel generators. And statistics from the MEMD research show that at least 12% businesses in the agricultural sector using diesel generators, 3% in education, and about 9.1% use diesel generators in the manufacturing sector. So there is an opportunity to actually reduce on the carbon footprint. Now, from a customer point of view, customers do have an option to own and actually finance their captive power plants, and that can be either self-owned or through third party. The option for the captive power plant being self-owned means that the customer pays for it and they actually own it. And on the other side, on the third party owned captive power plants, it's really where there is a power producer that builds, owns, and sells electricity to the commercial and industrial customer. Now, in terms of what the customers really are, and I need to give some examples also for context. So when we talk about high energy consuming commercial customers, we're really referring to petrol stations, we're referring to flour farms, we're referring to malls, and referring to hotels. And when we talk about industrial, we're looking at everything agro, processing or value addition, manufacturing, either light or heavy. Those are some of the examples to be able to differentiate between commercial and industrial. There are further options, again, that could be chosen from if someone is interested in installing a captive power plant, and these are really based on what source of energy that they're currently using. So the first option is the PV grid-tied system. It's really suitable for consumers that have high electricity consumption and would like to use solar during day and the grid at night. So there's an opportunity to actually have a system that is tied to the grid. The second option is a hybrid with PV and diesel, and this is mainly for consumers that are using diesel as the main source of power or have unreliable electricity, so they can combine a PV system to the diesel generator. And thirdly, the last option is for customers that are off-grid, so they do have an opportunity to actually use a captive power plant. So that's a bit about the context. Now I want to go into the research itself. So for this research, we took about 2 months and were able to do desktop research and indeed review a lot of literature. And we found very interesting literature on captive power, especially the reports from Get Invest and the reports from UNEP DTU that we've reviewed. We've also reviewed several company reports and government acts and policies to inform ourselves. We did carry out stakeholder interviews, so we really want to thank those stakeholders that made time to actually speak to us during, especially the COVID lockdown, where accessibility was a challenge. And today we are going through, actually, we'll go through some of the validation of the findings, and later on the report will be produced and really shared on the findings for captive solar. Then I will go straight into what some of the findings are. I'll start with the summary of the findings, and then I'll be able to unpack or get a bit into details. So the first finding from our research in terms of regulation is that C&I solar plants, at least generating less than 500 kilowatt, must register with ERA at a fee, and those that are generating more than 500 kilowatt must apply for a generation license. However, if it's for self-consumption, there is an option for license of own use that can be provided by ERA. The second finding is in regards to total installed capacity. So we did find about 1.5 net megawatts of installed capacity. Part of it, about 551, we took from the Get Invest report, and the balance was taken actually from the research that we did. And from the research, we also found that there is a pipeline of about 2 megawatts that is actually expected to be executed in the coming years. Now, this installed capacity is no way representative. There is a lot of information that is missing. So part of, I think, this project would be, I think, to be able to gather, more information, to have a much more clear picture of what the total installed capacity is. And we were not able to reach out to all the different companies. The third finding is that a majority, at least 84 of the plants, are self-owned and financed by customers, and 16% are, financed through either leasing and energy supply contracts. Fourth is the companies that are involved are majorly funded by impact investors and crowdfunding investors. There's limited involvement of local commercial banks. We'll get a bit more into detail. And thirdly, we see that it's still a market that is in its infant stage, but there are some early adopters that at least show that there is potential, especially within the commercial building segment and agro-processing and light industries, that demonstrate that there is potential, I think, for the market to grow. Now, in my next slides, I want to unpack a little bit some of these findings. And starting off with anyway, the regulation, you'll see that we have the key actors when it comes to regulation, MEFD, or Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development, the Electricity Regulatory Authority, and UNDS and URA that are involved in terms of policy formulation, issuance of license, and setting tariffs and approval for ERA, and UNDS for standard setting, enforcement, and quality assurance, and then URA mainly for revenue collection, accountability, and policy advice when it comes to revenue streams. So what we found when we looked at the regulatory framework is, one, the fact that Section 51 1 and 2 of the Electricity Act of 1999 requires anyone that is generating electricity below 500 kilowatt to actually register at a fee, and those with more than 500 kilowatts are required to have a generation license. We, in our interactions with colleagues from ERA, they also informed us that there is an opportunity to actually apply for a license of own use, especially for those that are more than 500 kilowatts. Companies and individuals are also required to actually have installation permits. There is specific Class X and Class Z installation permits. Class Z is the one that is specifically for individuals and for solar, and any specialized equipment like diesel generators and switch gears. And Class X is specifically for companies. Through also our engagement, we did find that ERA and the government, they're considering net metering under the upcoming new metering code. We think this is a good development, and it could potentially help in sale of excess power that is generated from some of these captive PV plants. moving forward to the second finding in terms of installed capacity, I think what you can see starting from 2013 is that the numbers have been increasing over time. The highest installed capacity that we've seen is in 2020 at about 380 kilowatts. However, as I said, this information is not exhaustive, it's not conclusive, we have some gaps, and we're also not considering all the installations through our donor projects are not considered within our, I think, analysis. So 65% of these are grid-tied, and 3% do have batteries as a backup, especially for critical load, and 15% of those installations are off-grid. Now, in terms of which facilities or sectors do contribute the most, we're seeing commercial facilities or installations, especially buildings, education and health, hotels, and horticulture actually contributing a lot, about 74%, and industries, like coffee and dairy, also contributing about 26% in terms of installed capacity, at the moment. There is also data that we were able to look at that potentially shows what's the market potential. I think the first data set is looking at how many customers are connected to the grid for commercial and industrial tariffs. And we have about 93,000 of these customers that could also be potential customers for captive solar. Through our analysis, we also identified 2 megawatts that is to be installed again in these coming 2 years, which is double, from the 1.9 megawatts. And in terms of which sectors are contributing, here we see a reverse. So we see industries contributing, I think, 50%, and then commercial sector contributing 44%. A lot of this is coming from manufacturing and agro-processing industries, and also hotels, as you can actually see, in this graph below. In regards to financing, what we're seeing again is in terms of where are the companies getting the financing from. I think it's through some of the crowdfunding platforms, some of them through their own revenues from other, product segments. And we're also seeing some impact investors involved. There's limited involvement for local commercial banks. And when we spoke to them, they highlighted, I think, 2 key constraints: the limited understanding of the opportunity and the sector. And the second challenge was, of course, the lack of capital to be able to provide the financing that is needed. Out of I think the different installations that have been made, as we saw earlier on, 84% are owned and financed by the consumers, meaning that the consumers have to find their own sources of revenue, since their businesses, their own cash flows, or they could potentially go to the bank. But we haven't seen a lot of success when it comes to consumers getting finances from the bank. Others, 16%, using third parties. Actually, the energy service companies themselves are the third parties who are working very closely with the crowdfunding platforms like Go Parity or Empower Life, which is actually an independent power producer, to either provide a finance lease or energy supply contract. And these do last for between 5 and 20 years. Specifically, finance lease and energy supply contracts, I think, have a lot of traction and opportunities for customers that are unable to, pay the higher upfront costs, because the costs are actually broken down across, a period of time. So we will definitely see, I think, this type of financing modalities being used within the sector. So that was a bit of a deep dive and then sharing a bit more onto, the findings. Now, I want to also highlight what are some of the key challenges that the C&I businesses are facing and customers. And finally, I will conclude so that I can open up for the discussion. So in terms of constraints, for most of the sector players, they're familiar with this constraint of access to finance. Specifically for C&I, there is a challenge that the available finance, the ticket sizes is higher. In the research, companies told us that what they're finding in terms of available finance is between 500,000 US dollars and 2 million US dollars, and yet the need is actually less than that. And for those that are using foreign investors, because there is a high country credit risk, then for some of these investors is rated at C+, so that increases the interest rate. The second challenge that we identified was the lack of technical expertise, especially in design and installations. So there are few, technicians who have the capacity to design and install large or even hybrid systems, in compared to those that have actually skills in designing and installation of the standalone and actually more home systems. So this is a key constraint. There is another constraint of the low customer confidence. And this is because of the low standard or the substandard products. So consumers think that some of these solar products won't be able to work. And also it's because there are few showcases, as you've seen, there are not so many installations. That also affects the confidence because everyone is interested in seeing where has it been installed and how is it working or whether it is actually working. The second last constraint is on the unclear regulatory framework. I believe we're going to have a bit of discussion around this. I earlier mentioned that these captive power plants have to register and they also have to, acquire a generation license. In most cases, it's not very clear how to register. Is there a different process from what is there for sale of electricity, especially through the notice of intended application? There are also, I think we need to clarify on what are the fees, especially for the license for own fees, for own use, sorry. Is it the 3,000 US dollars, or is it because it's for own use, there is no need to actually pay the $3,000? There is also a need, I think, to clarify on the legalities of PPAs, especially if they are, between the developer and the customer, especially for self-consumption. We know PPAs are being used, especially for sale of electricity, but we're not sure what's the current. In conclusion, this research, I guess we just want to reiterate and just bring to the fore that there is need for plants to be registered and acquire a license, and this is because we're not seeing or some of the plants are actually not registered, and we also told capacity will actually double, and specifically the market growth actually points to the commercial building and agro-processing industries, and this will actually be facilitated by, I think, the continued conducive economics, as long as solar is cheaper and they're able to provide it at lower than the tariff for the grid, and also a conducive regulatory environment. And finally, the need for not only financial support, also technical skills building are needed to grow and sustain the market for C&I in Uganda. So that's what I had to highlight when it comes to the research and the findings. I think looking forward to questions, but also looking forward to, I think, Joel digging deeper into some of these findings, with our panelists. So thank you very much, and over to you, Joel.
Okay, thank you, Julius, for quite a detailed presentation and on captive solar in Uganda. I would like to request the audience that we combine the questions on this presentation with the questions on the panel discussion that is to follow. We've allocated quite some time for that. So at this juncture, I would like to invite my panelists, Engineer Madam Ziria, Mr. George William from Postbank, Mr. David Mwonge from Nukafe, and Muhammed Lubowa. And well, of course, I might turn off my video because I see the internet is starting to be a bit shaky. So yeah, if your internet is strong, you can have your video on if you're at least when you're answering the question, and then you can turn off as we wait for others. So I'd like to start with Engineer Ziria. And my first question to you is drawing from Julius's last point. So it's on the regulatory environment. If you kindly let's share with the audience what are the policies and regulations that are in place to support deployment of captive solar plants? And I think of specific interest in that sort of very broad question is there a specific minimum size for grid integration? The licensing process for self-generation, is it similar to the general licensing process as displayed on the ERA website? And with regards to net metering and consumer protection, if there are any updates, you can also share with the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. And once again, good morning, dear participants. I'll briefly introduce what we do and then specifically respond to the areas that have been raised. I head the Electricity Regulatory Authority in charge of regulating the electricity supply industry in the country across the entire value chain, that is generation, transmission, distribution, sale, import, and export. And in addition, we do authorize all the players within the electricity supply industry, as well as the set and enforce performance standards. Now, I noted in the presentation that there is some bit of mix-up, because when you move from registration, the capacity for registration, then you move to the capacity for license exemption, because there's what we call license exemption. Actually, all the potential proposed projects that are below 2 megawatts, they qualify for a license exemption. And the application process is different. The cost implications are different. Specifically for the captive power, is purely for own use within the premise of the investor or the owner. The terms are largely to enhance safety and compliance with the license exemption terms and conditions, as well as protect the property and the lives of the people who may be exposed. In addition to that, the procedural process has some similarities with the licensing process. For example, you have to go through the public notice of 30 days, meaning you have to advertise the same. the media of wide circulation, as well as get an approval by the Office of the Solicitor General to register that exemption. So largely, you are at pure registration before at a level of below half a megawatt or 500 kilowatt. Between that and the 2 megawatts, you're looking at license exemption. And then above 2 megawatts, you are looking at a full license application. Now, irrespective of the capacity, so long as the motivation for implementation of the captive or grid-connected power plant is for supply to other consumers that are beyond the own use, then you then now have to migrate to either a license exemption or a full license. Because you have to comply fully with the law and the applicable regulations that you operationalize the law. So in brief, that is to do with the capacities and the licensing framework. We have a regulation in place for off-grid, and one can consider that if your captive power is not mainly for own use, but also for service to the areas within your environment, then you have to qualify within those regulations. Concerning the net metering, it is the work in progress as the presenter indicated. We are coming up with a separate code, metering code, and one of the objectives is to prepare for the continuous growth in captive power, specifically knowing that there are always surpluses, and even without surpluses, to make it affordable, there is need for the grid facility, because at times if you have to invest in the captive solar project as well as investing the battery facility for the period when Mother Nature is not available, or solar battery storage, it makes the whole arrangement more expensive than the grid power. So we're also aware that we need to be available to support the captive solar plant or power users. Of course, I noted some of the statistics is a bit old, possibly the presenter should always put something there to improve the accuracy. Then the other one is the issue of the cost of the captive power vis-a-vis the grid-connected power can be justified in rural areas where the grid does not reach, or where the financial viability to extend the grid power is not it is not viable to extend the grid power because of the sparse nature of the settlement partners. But when it comes to industrial areas and areas where the grid has already reached, it more supports in the area of reliability for critical production processes, but also given the cost of captive powers compared to the capacities that industrial production requires, you find that the captive solar storage only helps to sustain just part of the critical production processes, but it may not be able to power the entire production processes. It is well appreciated, especially the fact that it depends, especially solar depends on Mother Nature, and if you go in the other areas of thermal, then the issues of carbon emission, but also the cost of fuel. So it is well appreciated, and that is why government is focusing at making the price of electricity for industrial consumers as competitive as possible to support industrialization. So we as a government, we are leveraging more of the REs, the rooftops, and maybe captive solar in ports. We are promoting it for accelerating access to green energy. I've seen some numbers there. The most recent survey puts our access at 57%, and this combines both the grid connected and the solar home systems, rooftops, off-grid C and captive solar power plants. There are various opportunities and areas of collaboration, because it means the other 43% of the population is waiting for us to be able to access green energy. They are still depending on hazardous sources of energy. And in addition to accelerating access to clean energy to 100% of the population, we are also looking at industrialization. So the other opportunity that we see is within supporting reliability of supply for those critical production processes to be able to sustain the industrial processes as we continuously improve the reliability of supply. So I would like to thank you. I'm not sure whether there is anything that I've not responded to, but I remain available, and I believe that the political climate, I was also surprised that the credit risk is high, and apart from the non-documented agreement, I think Uganda has the best regulatory framework on the African continent, and also has tried to de-risk the sector. We have the most mature regulatory framework on the continent. We made 2 decades last year. When it comes to the net metering of really connected, we have almost a cost recovery tariff, save for the transmission segment, where the government supports us to develop and extend the big infrastructure. However, our consumers pay the check for the electrons that they consume. As we progressively grow demand to even out this cost and progressively bring the tariff down, we have collection rates of about 99.5, above 99.5%. It's very high, and we have also been available to provide the security documents, including implementation agreement, which backs up the off-taker. So really that area of risk that leads to high cost of capital that frustrates the efforts of the private and the government players to provide access to affordable clean energy. I think that should be an area of interest. It should be an area of interest for further. I would like to thank you. I know we are running against time, but I know you will share my contacts, and I remain regularly able to continue with this collaboration, as well as provide any necessary support that may be required. The net metering guideline, we have outsourced the activity, and we expect that within 18 months we should have it mature. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam, for that very comprehensive response. And yes, you've at least addressed every aspect of that question. Thank you for that and for the very valuable information you have shared. At this juncture, I would like to switch to private sector, and I'd like to ask Mr. Muhammed Lubowa, in your opinion, and basing on all in trade's experience, what is the potential for C&I solar in Uganda?
Thank you very much, Joel. I must say that the future is bright for our sector in this kind of direction. And over the past years, we've done quite extensive research in terms of mapping out who our potential clients would look like. And you see that the market is wanting, and there is a huge demand for decentralized energy generation, and particularly for self-consumption. And one of the key areas that now we are trying to focus on is how we make these energy solutions and assets affordable, and to make sure that who is making this decision finds it really attractive. And just like the previous speakers have mentioned, that we are still trying to work out and forge partnerships with lenders, with financing institutions, to make sure that the affordability aspect and credit risk and the financial risk aspects are all taken care of at even. I'm happy that our regulators are also open-minded on what the space future should look like, and this really gives us a great potential, and it really highlights how bright the future is going to be for our space. As a practitioner, as a business, we are extremely excited that now discussions are not even shy to talk about, say, having 100 kilowatt, say having 500 kilowatt, for where it can be channeled for self-consumption. So the future is bright for the space, and we're just eager to see that we have more clients coming on board. We have more off-takers considering particularly solar for their self-consumption. Back to you, Joel.
Okay. Thank you, Muhammad. Yourself and Madame Ziria have both mentioned the aspect of financing that needs to be looked at. So at this juncture, I'd like to bring in Mr. George William from Post Bank. And my question to you is, what is the bank's experience in providing investment for energy access? And what measures has the bank put in place to accelerate investments for green energy?
Thank you, Joel, and thank you, members, for this discussion. Joel, just like Julius rightly put it, not most banks have really been so much into energy financing, or specifically green energy financing. Banks have not been looking at it as a core product that we can explore to support our customers in one or the other. So I mean, it has not been any different with Post Bank, but I think over starting from last year and to date, we've been doing a bit of research on these products, and specifically we call it green financing. We have put as some of the measures we have put as a strategic objective. We have set up a green financing strategy to be rolled out before year end, and before year end meaning this particular year. So there is so much that we are putting together to ensure that this is also a core business for the bank. As the bank, we are looking at building capacity for our staff, because we rightly know if we do not have the right staff to look at that specific product, we shall go back to where we have been. We've enrolled about 4 individuals. Now we call them trainers to the Green Finance Academy, and sponsored by UGEFA. So these individuals, we believe by the time they come out, coupled with what the kind of research we've made and what we currently know, they're going to direct strategy in green financing to ensure that we do much more than we have already done. And the same, that will inform the kind of products in this space, in the green financing space, that we are going to roll out any time before by the end of the year. We are also thinking of seeking out and acquire partnerships with institutions, with those institutions that have green financing objectives. Those institutions that we believe, one, have been into green financing and they have done quite a lot and they have the experience. One, for us to grow this kind of product together with the people who have already been into this space. But we are also planning to roll out programs to support investments in green finance products or initiatives in collaborations with green finance partners that we may on board. We are looking, as part of the strategy, we are looking at if we have customers in this line, because I think it's Julius who rightly put it, that the interest rates are a bit high, and the kind of finances that we, as the banks that have been offering to such a space, because they look at it as a very risky area, even, I mean, because we didn't know so much about it. So you tend not to, you tend to put a higher interest rate because you think it is very risky. You're not sure whether whether your money is going to come back or not. But after that research and everything, we believe we are going to put grace periods based on the revenue generating capacity of the initiative. If you give money to company X, you don't expect them to pay there and then, because I mean, they're going to take time before they recoup this money. They have to install the power plants and everything. Like I also put it, also we would also like to partner with other institutions that offer guarantee limits for various green financing initiatives. We believe there are quite a number of institutions out there that would like to see this kind of product go forward, and we believe if the company or one of our customers does not have enough collateral or security to guarantee to act as collateral for his loan that they may need for such an initiative, if we partner with some institution or development partners who can guarantee us and say that, okay, if you give money to this kind of people, we can guarantee you 50%, and as the bank, you also guarantee 50%, so that we can that will help us reduce on the interest rate and ensure that at the end of the day we give money to the people in this space. We would also like to partner. We think about partnering with institutions to supplement on the liquidity that is required to lend out. I think again it is Julius who talked about it, that banks are looking for the kind of deposits that we have that we use to lend out. Anytime they move out, and when we go to lend from other parties, it becomes kind of expensive. So if we have these partner organizations that can supplement on the liquidity of the bank to lend out, we think that will also push us as financiers or as the banks to ensure that we improve the lending in this particular space.
Okay.
We also believe that, yes,
yeah,
Joel?
Conclude that sentence. Your time is 30 seconds.
Okay. Then we are also looking at having an MOUs, a memorandum of understandings with the solar companies to avoid one diversion and to build trust amongst the potential and the existing customers. Over to you, Joel. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, George William. I think it might also be interesting for Postbank to explore. I think there's a line of financing available with Uganda Development Bank, particularly for green and climate finance. So I think it's something interesting to follow up after the call. My next question, David, I'd like to, if you could tell the audience, from Nucafe's perspective, what was the motivation for installing a captive solar plant? Has the installation improved your business? And you could also just combine it with this, and then you say access to finance is one of the key barriers to the increased uptake. So how did Nucafe finance the installation of its captive solar plant? Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Joel. David, a coffee farmer working for coffee farmers. Our biggest motivation was in terms of reducing the cost of electricity in terms of the processing, since this is a secondary processing facility where we do the grading of coffee and export. So we looked at reducing the cost at our level and thereby transferring the savings to the individual farmers to enable them to have a higher return from the market. Then we also looked at it as a market entry investment where we have buyers that are interested in what is called eco-friendly coffees. And we have managed to achieve about 3 new buyers, some of them being fair trade certified, that really look forward to receiving coffee where the whole chain is completely using green and sustainable energy. So those were some of the motivations for us to go into investing in the plant that we have. We have also seen that with that we have achieved significant visibility as an organization in the market, with some local players seeking knowledge on how we really have done this, and also thinking about adopting the same, which we believe there will be a bit of industry uptake in terms of having the captive solar. Then we also wanted to have the data which is needed in terms of making this kind of investments. Most of the players in the coffee industry, and I think also in the agriculture sector, did not believe that solar power can really be used for industrial purposes. And also in, I would say, off-grid areas where sometimes the location of a factory, like a coffee factory, has been mainly determined by how close you are to the national grid, which may not be the most strategic place, but simply because that's the place where you have the access to the national grid. So some of those were really the motivating factors. The other is the time of operation, given the power tariff bands that we have. With solar energy, you have a wider time scope for your operations. In terms of financing, we are grateful. We worked with Abbey Development, which is also partly Danida funded for impact financing. So we had part of the financing as a grant and also received some technical support from NIRAS and the EU in terms of setting up the plant that we have. And also we looked for some long-term financing locally, especially for the warehouse where part of the power, the solar panels are. However, I think locally, the view about solar is that it is very high cost and does not pay. Yet in the long term, this really is not the case. And I think more local financial institutions need to get involved and look at the real data. And that's why we saw data as one of the most important things that are really needed for us to have. Then lastly, maybe I could also talk about what we really recommend from our experience. There's very, very limited local technical capacity in terms of installation, design, installation, even operation of such facilities. So that needs to be really boosted. And then the net metering, I think for most of the grid-tied facilities like what we have would be something that would be very welcome in terms of further managing the cost reduction, but also in terms of optimal use of the abundant irradiation that we have because of our location. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David, for that very detailed response, and you've touched on all the points that I had here. What I'm going to do is I've been seeing there are some questions that have been posted, so I'll probably start answering those. So, Engineer Madam Ziria, for someone in the chat, I think Paul Sengowa is asking, what is the timeline to net metering being active?
Thank you. I have been trying to populate the answers in the chat room, of course, looking at the clock. But we are looking at a maximum of 18 months, and the delay is appreciated because it's funded by development partners, and you have to go by the rule their game at every stage of procurement. But we believe within 18 months we shall have them up and running. I can also share, because there was a general question at the beginning, how do we address the multiple challenges? On capacity building, we have funding from World Bank. For the last 2 years, we've been training free through the Ministry of Energy. We have constructed demonstration too, because across 70 technical teaching institutions, and up to now that program is still on. And the objective we have experienced through our certification processes that potential applicants have the academic qualifications, they usually lack the practical experience. So we have sourced players in the industry who have been working and installing, and they are helping us in the GIT together with the to build the practical competency in a limited time. And after that, we take them through the rigorous process of both the theory and practical interviews, and they are certified. So on that side of capacity building, government is already moving ahead. Then also on the side of the quality, the challenge of the quality, those who have been observant at the beginning of this year, we gazetted the standard for the panels through the UNBS, and we have an active MOU between ourselves as the regulator of the industry and the Uganda National Bureau of Standards. Under this MOU, we partner in ensuring the quality of the electricity supply equipment, meters, accuracy, and also enforcement. We joined. Utility was the provider, again the one to test it, even acquiring test benches, as well as now we have a gazetted standard which we are partnering to enforce. That is on the side of skilling. We have moved in those areas. Also, we have the UECCC, the Uganda Energy Capital Cooperative Company of government, that is available to incubate green startups, especially in the areas of designing. They are able to mobilize grant funding to support startups, so that by the time you make a decision, at least the capital has been taken care of the sector. But also then that is able to de-risk, those high risks that are perceived by the private financiers that make the cost of financing very, very expensive. So we are very hopeful that this industry will be vibrant and be able to support the government agenda in accelerating access to clean energy, but also support us as we transit, because we have done so well in the generation segment. We now have adequate capacity. The transmission grid is almost reaching all country, but now in the area of access as well as reliability and the LOV in the distribution network, it's an area that we know we still need to inject in a lot of capital. But when you do a viability analysis, there are more advantages to leverage some of these captive solar projects than extending the whole grid, which may not even be beneficial along the way. It will only be, extending without tapping in. So thank you very much. I remain available for any additional questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam. Muhammad, maybe you could step in here. A question for you. Could you share a bit what kind of clients or off-takers are considering captive solar, the categories or the sectors from which they come from, and what kind of processes captive solar is able to support, I think from a technical perspective. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Joel. And to Paul, here at All in Trade Limited, we have mapped out and classified our clients by sector. We have done extensive research and supported various clients in the agriculture space. And our energy solutions that we've deployed are able to support all energy demands. In our, they are totally independent of any other energy source, and they are able to have their demands fully satisfied by the energies that we've supported. And these are entirely running for all the operations on solar, where we've deployed PV systems to a size of 20 kilowatts. We are also closely monitoring other spaces and other sectors like the commercial and business malls, whose peak demand and whose energy requirement is always during the day, where we can be able to deploy PV systems with a minimal energy storage component. And the good news here is that globally the cost of PV is on a decline. So the panels, say 10 years ago, compared to what it is today, is it is something that is extremely attractive and enticing for any business to make a decision to take the solar route. So we've clearly mapped out the clients by sector, but mainly we have been very active in the agriculture space and mainly targeting people who are taking on these energy assets or where they are using the energy generated to make money, like the guys in the dairy space I've mentioned, who have to keep their milk chilled at all times when the off-takers like Jessa comes to pick their milk, such that it doesn't go bad. Back to you, Joel and Paul.
Yes, I think you have. Thank you, Muhammad. Quick question here for David. Is it possible to give an indication of what your return on investment is from the time when you installed? Maybe an estimate figure what your savings are so far from the capital investment, from the captive solar investment.
Thank you very much, Joel. From what we have done, of course, it varies across different irradiation, but on average, our savings are about 60%, and translating it into real terms, that would be on average about 6 million. But as our power plant, as we keep on increasing the capacity of our plant, we know the absolute percentage may reduce. However, the amount of money will be in terms of the savings.
Thank you, David, for that. response. I can see a question from David Charlo. What are some of the key selling points you can share with the government to have more impact investors attracted into Uganda's solar PV space? Question, I see it going in very different directions. Is actually one of the selling points, but basically what and this would be direct investors, so that the fact that the potential has been shown that even though the active space to have active captive solar systems, but data from Uganda Manufacturers Association shows that if you're looking at medium and large industrial clients, you're looking at a pool of approximately up to 400 clients. So that is still, the surface has barely been scratched if you look at that. But also, and something very interesting that it was also highlighted in the presentation, but also Madame Ziria providing grid stability as reliability. I hope, Dennis Charlo, your question has been responded to. Justin here mentioning how come telecom companies have not been mentioned in any of the presentations. I'd like to ask Julius to please take this one.
Thank you, Joel. So we principally left out telecom companies and also left out installations for a couple of projects. We did speak to some of the telecom operators, like ATC, and we realized that most of the installations are below 3 kilowatt, actually between 3 kilowatt to 9 kilowatt. So even when there is potential, we did not include that data, but we do have the data with us from the research. Thank you, and over to you, Joel.
Okay, thanks, Julius. I'm seeing Catherine Nsungwa here has a question on the issue of poor quality solar products on the market and whether ERA is leading this effort. Ziria mentioned this in her presentation this year. There were new national standards for solar that were gazetted by National Bureau of Standards, and ERA is working closely with the National Bureau of Standards on drafting an enforcement plan for how this will be enforced. So in the near future, we should start seeing cleanup efforts ongoing to extract questionable quality solar products from the market. I see a question here from Lakshmi for Engineer Ziria on how captive PV systems and similar hybrid systems have higher skill requirements, entailing certain degree of engineering and sizing of the system appropriate to each consumer, as well as implementing seamless grid and captive interactions, as well as handling of operations and maintenance. Maybe, Madame Ziria, you'd care to address how, within the framework of the current training that you mentioned earlier, how...
Yes, I did respond in the chat that when the hybrid element comes in, then the system operator has to come in. We're operating a single buyer system. So when there is any decision to now connect, enter into net metering, Then now we tap into the resources of the transmission company, also doubles as the system operator, but also specifically for intermittent sources of energy. The transmission company performs periodical studies to ensure that the capacities that we are bringing on are able to be operationalized without affecting grid stability. So when it comes to now hybrid connecting on to the grid, the system operator comes in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam. Sorry, I hadn't seen your response, but thank you for that.